On a warm June morning in 1922, the Foreign Minister of Germany got into his open topped car to drive to work along a quiet road through a leafy Berlin suburb, as he did every day. He never arrived. What happened to Walther Rathenau that morning and to Matthias Erzberger on a woodland path the summer before wasn't the work of madmen acting alone. It was organised, funded, and carried out by young men who believed they were saving the country. This is the story of the secret society that murdered the German Republic's best servants during the summers of 1921 to 1922, and of how lightly they were treated by the law. To understand these murders, you have to understand what the war left behind. When the fighting stopped in 1918, Germany was full of young officers and soldiers for whom the war had been the one great meaning of their lives. They just could not accept that the war had been lost. Many of them went into Freikorps, the volunteer paramilitary units that were used to crush the revolutionaries. And when the government tried to disband them, and they came out in an attempted coup during the spring of 1920. The coup collapsed in the face of a general strike. But those men didn't simply go home and give up. Many of them went underground. One of the remnants of one such brigade became a secret organisation, taking the rather innocuous name of Organisation Consul, and its express purpose was assassination. Number one on the assassins list was Matthias Erzberger. His crime, in their eyes, was that he had put his name to the armistice in November 1918. He had signed it because somebody had to, and the generals, particularly Field Marshal Hindenburg, categorically refused to do it. They insisted that they couldn't carry on fighting, but refused to take responsibility for the armistice that therefore had to come next. For that act, he was called a traitor for the rest of his short life, and he was blamed for the defeat that he had no part in causing. On the 26th of August 1921, he was on holiday in the Black Forest. He went out walking after lunch with a colleague, heading down to the local village that he could see from the window of his hotel. They were approached by two young men who had been tracking them for days. They shot Erzberger down and injured his colleague. His killers then escaped to Hungary, which was sympathetic and refused extradition, and they lived on quietly under assumed names for decades. Organisation Consul's next target was even more prominent. Walther Rathenau was one of the most remarkable men in Europe. He was an industrialist who had run Germany's raw materials organisation during the war. He was the chairman of AEG, the electrical conglomerate. He was a multimillionaire, a philosopher who wrote books on the soul of the age. And by 1922, he had become foreign minister of the Weimar Republic. He was also, and this was perhaps the most unforgivable crime in the eyes of his killers, he was a Jew. In a country where a poisonous street rhyme was already being chanted calling for his death, he knew perfectly well that he was a marked man, and he declined to change his habits. On the morning of the 24th of June 1922, he got into his open-top car, turned into Koningsallee in Grunewald, where his house was, and another car drew up alongside. A young man stood up in the back of it and fired a submachine gun at close range. A second threw a hand grenade into the back of the car. Rathenau died in the road. He was the foreign minister to Germany, murdered on his way to his office in daylight in a residential street. Then something happened which is hard to forget, but so many people have. Germany was appalled. Hundreds of thousands of people came out onto the streets in mourning, in protest. The Reichstag draped itself in black. Within weeks, the government passed a law for the protection of the Republic, arming itself at last against exactly this kind of terror. The killers themselves were on the run, and they were brought to justice within a month. Two of them, the two who had fired and thrown the grenades, were cornered in a castle in Saxony, and they died there in a shootout with police. And for a moment, it looked as though the Republic had actually found its backbone and had pushed back. But that's unfortunately not what happened, because the courts then got involved. And the courts had never been reformed. The judges were still the old imperial judges of the Kaiserreich. The men convicted for planning and supporting these killings received, on the whole, incredibly modest sentences. Many of them were out again within a couple of years, some released even earlier under amnesties. Some went on to live very comfortable and successful lives. The driver of the car in the Rathenau murder was pardoned. And this was a pattern that statistician Emil Goebel documented so carefully. Murder committed by the political right in the Weimar Republic was punished, when it was punished at all, with a leniency that would have been comic if it were not so horrific. The state mourned its foreign minister magnificently and then let his killers, who survived, off with little more than a slap on the wrist. Goebel estimated that a murder committed by the right was on average punished by 8 months or less in jail, whereas a murder carried out by those on the left typically led to a life sentence or execution. So those are the murderous German summers of 1921 to 1922. The same warm months that filled the lakes and fairgrounds also made a foreign minister reachable on the Königsallee and a signatory of the armistice reachable on a woodland path. The country's own courts could not and would not treat those deaths as the murders they were. I write detective stories set in these years, and this is one of the things that keeps drawing me back to this period, when the law won't reliably call a murderer a murder. A man who insists the truth of a killing is not a bureaucrat. He's something close to a rebel. And that's the ground Alaricvontrelowmysteries stands on. And there's no shortage of that ground. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please subscribe for more. Thanks very much.